This was fabulous place, but we had to add a twist, and we took the liberty to do that. Mark was okay with it, so we just rolled. So, hey, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us early. We started things earlier, so we realized that we give, not the 8:30 opening, but 9 o'clock, and that slides to 9:15. Hopefully, we'll pick up through the day. We had some changes in terms of people not, and in fact, I should probably just let you know that Erin really wanted to make it. She is the founder of Space ISAC and also VP of Operations. I met her at the National Cybersecurity Center annual symposium last week, I forget where I am these days, but fabulous work that she's doing, but she had a health issue, so she has to stay back. So we just have a equally powerful panel now. Eric can talk about his K through 12. So great. We had some chat earlier too. So I just wanted to have a kind of opening in terms of with information sharing. There are several levels of information sharing. There is intelligence sharing, and then there is information sharing, and then there is the knowledge sharing that's outside, right? And the three panelists we have today have been pivotal. This, I think, Denise and John started way back when people really didn't know what to do with information sharing, and then Eric is leaving that, through that life through again, trying to build up this whole K through 12 ISAC. So Eric, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we go down the line.
My name is Eric Langford. I am currently with Birdville Independent School District, which is a K through 12 school district over by Fort Worth. I've been there a year. Before that, I was in the corporate world about 20 years in the information security field. And Val mentioned the K-12 ISAC, and that was something that actually I initiated with a panelist that was here last year and have been working on for this past year.
I'm Denise Anderson. I am the president of the Health Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or Health ISAC. I'm also the chair of the National Council of ISACs. I've been doing the ISAC thing for almost 15 years. I was employee number 2 at FS ISAC, the financial services, and so I'm happy to talk about information sharing.
Hi, I'm John South. I was going to bring a ream about this big for my introduction, but been in the field for a while. So I had the honor of actually 20 plus years ago sitting down with a young FBI agent and establishing the InfraGard here in Dallas. So we've been doing the InfraGard for, I guess, 21 years now. And, but I also have worked with the FSISAC and on the financial side of the house. Also a former CISO at Heartland Payment Systems. And just to keep busy, I'm also a professor at the University of Dallas where I teach cyber law. So.
That's great. And John has been with us since the inception, 2016. So, I mean, probably that goes somewhere on the whole stack, right? So, John, maybe we start with you in terms of information sharing. How have you seen this whole, when people really didn't understand, there was also legal issues of sharing, and now where there's a push to share, right?
Yeah, there is and there isn't. So, yeah, so when we started, certainly 20 years ago, the corporate lawyers were deeply involved in what does that really mean that I'm giving out information? Is it going to affect our reputation? Is it going to affect a legal position that we may have because of a breach or whatever? And we had to work hard on anonymizing the data and showing that it would be anonymized. The other problem that we had early on was I guess I just call it the two-way street problem. And that was we could put information into the system, but getting information back out was a challenge. So especially anybody here from the FBI? Anybody a lawyer? I just wanted to say, because that cuts out about 3/4 of my jokes, but anyway. No, but FBI had a tough job because they couldn't just give anything back out because they really were challenged with how to separate sources and methods and TTP and everything that they just couldn't share. So, so that was the challenge we had when we first started out. But yes, there was a lot of legal challenge. Same thing with the ISAC too. There was a lot of legal challenge. And when we first started, and I'll talk a little bit later about the PPISC, which was the Payment Processors Information Sharing Council. We had, it evolved out of the Heartland breach. And we had, you guys want to talk too, or not? So it evolved out of the Heartland breach where where we found out that some of our competitors knew about the tactic that had been used, but we didn't. And so it was something that we could share. So that was, and I'll talk about that because it really took a company opening up the kimono and saying, here, look at what happened. And then the flood started.
Yeah, please, absolutely.
So I was going to say, so you alluded to the anonymous sharing as being the original way that companies shared it, and the FSISAC, certainly that was the case. But then in the early, probably like 2008, 2009 timeframe, we started a thing called the Traffic Light Protocol, TLP. And FSISAC was actually one of the leaders in bringing that over here. They borrowed it from MI5 in the UK, and then we adapted it to sharing here. And then we also, so what that does is the traffic light protocol is like it's like a traffic light, red, amber, green, and white. And it's the originator of information can decide how that information can be shared. So if I mark it red, TLP red, that means TLP red, John, Denise, we can only share with each other and it can't go beyond that. Or if it's in this room, that kind of thing. Amber means that you share it within your organization, the member organizations of the ISAC traditionally, and then green is with trusted partners, and white is open source. So what that did was it opened up the lens for sharing because people now could decide how they wanted it to be disseminated. We also had list servers we started up, so basic email list servers where people could actually see who was sharing the information. And what that did was it actually allowed more information sharing to occur because they saw the value in what was being shared. They built the relationships around the information, and then they were, it started that community where people said, I want to help each other out. So that was where sharing within the ISAC really took off, when we were able to do those kinds of things.
And Eric, you're in an interesting situation now. So thank you, Dennis. Thank you, John. I think coming to Eric in terms of where do you see the transition, and are you more equipped right now, or are you still, trying to make your way into building a new ISAC from where?
I think from where they started, they're definitely more equipped. One of the organizations that I worked with, Global Resilience Federation, was a direct offshoot of Financial Services ISAC, because Financial Services ISAC, being one of the first, had so many organizations coming to them saying, hey, can you create this? That's when, I guess in 2017 that it was spun out? CRF?
Yeah, earlier than that, yeah.
Well, I mean, I know you guys were doing, I know Financial Services.
No, so it was actually before that because I left FSISAC in 2015 and it started
Okay, so it
with
was
me.
before that.
So,
Well,
yeah.
I know they
So
started
it was before that. It was
yeah,
about
but
2013.
Anyways, so now Global Resilience Federation, that is their one job, is to help organizations, whatever it may be, build ISACs, ISALs, just so that, to take all that burden off of how do we do it, what do we do, they have everything in place.
So let me take that and probably go around this way now. What do you see as your case study what's common and what's different for you? You have done some research by now in terms of, what is unique about K-12 ISAC, and then what's common that you can share?
Well, with K-12, so where this really idea for K-12 ISAC started was I was doing some work for a private school, and I said, there's got to be something I can get these guys involved in, some type of information sharing, and there was nothing I could find. There's MS ISAC, which is multi-state. Public institutions, public schools can be a part of. Well, private schools, they're out of that. There's a REN ISAC, which is basically higher education ISAC. Again, K-12 cannot be a part of that. So I thought, well, there's a gap there. And so K-12, and then now where I'm at in a public school, just seeing that so as the public school I'm with, we are part of MS-ISAC, but the problem with MS-ISAC is so broad, it covers, it's just that, it's multi-state, is everything. So there's not a lot of specifics related just to K-12, and What I see as the need for K-12 is the ability to have something that just the typical information sharing, but also that they can come and say, hey, we don't even have policies. Can you help us with a policy? Can you provide templates for policies? So a lot of that type of thing that is just not available for K-12 schools, especially the smaller ones that just don't have the resources.
And Denise, you, on the other hat, you wear about National Association of ISACs. How frequently do you see people coming and asking for a new type of ISAC? I mean, are you going to have I actually quipped about having a non-profit ISAC. And then people start, like, okay, ISAC's a non-profit. I'm like, I want a non-profit ISAC for a non-profit. Right? So,
Yeah, there you go. So very often, actually, we have a lot of people come, but let me back up with Information Sharing and Analysis Center. So how many people are familiar with an ISAC? Okay. Basically, Information Sharing and Analysis Centers were formed around critical infrastructure. So those things that are, like electricity, commercial facilities, finance, health, defense. So they were started in 1998 under Presidential Decision Directive 63 under President Bill Clinton. Primarily on Y2K at the time was the concern, to get industry to share with each other across the sectors and with government. And finance was one of the first groups. In fact, this year is 20 years that they've been around, to say, you know what, this makes a lot of sense, we're gonna go do it. And so the ISACs have evolved over time. I've mentored a lot of startup ISACs, aviation, oil and gas, and automotive, to name some of them. And basically, we have a community of ISACs, so that's the National Council of ISACs. And we share, one of the myths is that we don't share across the sectors, and that's absolutely not true. We share all the time, daily. We're working across the sectors. When an incident occurs, we're collaborating with each other. We're collaborating with information throughout our sectors. There was just an example 2 weeks ago where one of the sectors saw some information and shared it to the community and said, is anybody else seeing this? Because we're concerned it's a targeted attack. Other people were seeing it across the sectors, and so they were able to determine that it wasn't a targeted attack, and it made them sleep better at night. So, we're constantly working with each other in that manner. And then we're constantly working with the community where ISACs fit, that we help mentor them and build them. We also worked very heavily with the ISAOs, so the Information Sharing and Analysis Organizations, which was under 2013, a presidential directive under President Obama. 15, sorry. And so basically, it was allowing organizations to come together to share information in communities that may not be tied to critical infrastructure. And it could be for-profit or not-for-profit. So anybody that wanted to come together to share that information, they could. And the ISACs took a really big part in helping develop a lot of the materials that were used to help organizations start forming sharing organizations, so to speak. So there's been a lot of mentoring going on in the field, and like I said, constantly. In fact, I think I had someone yesterday asking about, how do they form an ISAC? So I get that quite often.
So, John, I think from Denise's point onwards, you started, when you started the whole information sharing community, I mean, there was no formal ISACs probably at that point, right? When you see the data or exposure then and the exposure now, and versus what you can share, what you cannot share, what's your thought and guidance for someone who's starting off in that journey again?
Well, certainly one of the problems that we share as a practitioner is the amount of data that comes out. So Denise was talking about the list shares that come out, or listservs that come out to everybody, and that just tons of data there. And one of the problems that the FS-ISAC was trying to solve at one point in time was, how do we get all this data out to people so that they can actually take advantage of it? And the name again escapes me. I keep thinking Solaris, but it's not. Sultra. So they were working on Sultra, and that eventually spun off, and I think NC4 has it now. Yeah, but and I think that's the concept today, is how do I get information out to people at a rate that they can use it? Because I actually had to hire a person just to go through all the data that was coming out. It was just so much of it. But the hope was that we could get to a point where we could do wire speed activity. And the problem there is standards. So we could do the taxi and get data out to people pretty good, pretty well. But I had an ArcSight device, and ArcSight didn't understand sticks and taxi. So we had to write a connector, they had to get a connector to connect it. So that's kind of I think the explosion today is that there's a lot of information, and some of it, I mean, you can see it in the healthcare industry, or you can see it in K-12. How do I really take advantage of all that? Somebody's got to look at that data. At the end of the day, even if it's wire speed, there has to be a human at the end of that chain who has to make that intelligence decision. How do I use this data? What's relevant to me? And when we first started 20-some years ago, it was pretty easy because it was like one message every 3 or 4 months. But yeah, it wasn't quite that late. It was, but it was much less rate than it is today. When I look at some of the information and intelligence that we get today, it's huge. It's a huge amount of data.
Right. So thank you, John. Denise, I'll come back to you about, say, how do you decide? So you have the traffic light protocol in terms of a structure, right? How do you decide which data goes where? Is it a discretionary thing or is it a standard that ISAC puts? I don't think many people know about it.
So it is a standard. And just to elaborate what Soltra is, just in case you didn't understand what that was, it's machine-to-machine sharing. So it's the fact that humans don't touch that data, and they can decide. And it's basically taking care of the noise, right? Because there's a lot of noise out there, a lot of indicators that get shared. And this way, machines, if you trust the machine, it's all about trust, actually. If you trust the data and the source of the data and you want the machine to block it automatically, you can set that up, and then you're not dealing with it at all. But back to the TLP, so the originator of that information decides that. So if, for example, John said when he was at Heartland wanted to share something back to the FSISAC, he would have marked it TLP Amber. That meant it could only be shared within the FSISAC membership. So we just follow that standard. We also have adopted it for the National Council of ISACs, where we broaden it a little bit so that if it's Amber, it's shared amongst all the member ISACs and their members. So that's how we've kind of adopted it to our environment. DHS adopted TLP as well. And then FIRST, which is an organization of certs, global certs, helped define what their version of TLP would be. So each community can define TLP based on their environment and their needs, but it is a basic structure and format that people agree to abide by. And like, for example, in Health ISAC and in FSISAC, I know for sure, and many other member ISACs, they require an NDA where people agree to abide by TLP as part of their membership. So it's a trust community. And when anyone asks me basically who we are as an ISAC, we are a trusted community for sharing.
Well, that brings an interesting topic about trust, right? I don't know how many of in the room probably looked at the new Zero Trust standard. So Zero Trust is the new thing. And when you start with Zero Trust, I mean, how do you define when you go from 0 to 1, right? Yeah, no, I think that's pretty interesting because that's the traffic light protocol and the automation through Soltra, the machine-to-machine communication, they have actually gave probably Eric the tools that you would need to be equipped with. So I'll take that forward to Eric in terms of when you are starting right now. I mean, are there any standard processes that you're going through? I mean, how are you building this community? Is there an ask from the community, or you're giving it to the community?
So I think the community, the K-12 community knew they needed something, but I think a lot of the K-12 community did not know what an ISAC or an ISAL was.
I see.
So as I've gone through this process and got it in front of different people, and they're like, oh, yes, we need this. And now Rory Peacock, who was on the panel yesterday, yes. I think he's an example of one of the regional service centers doing basically information sharing, but not knowing that an ISAC was out there. What he did after they were after they had their ransomware attack is he said, okay, I'm going to help all my member schools. And he started doing things like saying, hey, in Texas, there's the Texas Cybersecurity controls, 40 controls, which is basically a subset of NIST. And so he said, look, most schools don't have any policies or any template in place. So he said, I'm just going to take those and put them in a Google Doc and say, hey, look, I'm sharing this with the schools so that at least they have a policy they can customize. So I think there's schools out there that are doing it, but they just don't know.
I see.
They don't know
There's
the,
no structured
the
formality.
formality of it. And so that's what that I have tried to do is get people to understand, hey, there's a formal structure that's already there. There's organizations that can help build this. We don't have to recreate the wheel.
Got it. So when you have this, so there is I think there's the policies are probably easier to share, right? I mean, there's a document and you get it that use as a template. When you go from policy to the architecture of this, and because that's what you created, at FSISAC and then Health ISAC, and you created the automation platforms, you created the standards that are being used today. Where do you see, I have got this question from many of our members, that when do you have say there is a classified information, right? That the two-way street that you talked about, if, FBI can only share so much with you, at one point there was no sharing, and then the two-way opened up, and then DHS created AIS as one option to share back. What is your engagement on the government side, where, from the industry is getting from the government, both support and influence?
So I have a little bit of a jaded view on this topic. FSISAC example has this, so the DHS has changed names so many times, but the old version was called the NCIC.
Yeah.
How many people are familiar with the NCIC? The National Cybersecurity and Communications Center. So basically what that was designed to be was a classified floor at the top secret compartmented level where private sector could put some people on the floor to get information. And FSISAC does have a seat on the floor, as well as a number of ISACs do. And we exercised that very well in the 2012-2013 DDoS attacks against the financial sector. So we were able to real-time share information with each other. I think in the meantime, we've had a lot of, with Snowden and all this stuff, the clearance process got broken, and there's a lot of people that no longer have access to the floor for a variety of reasons. And some of that sharing has kind of broken down. But my philosophy on it is that if you get, and I saw this work very well in finance, if you get certain cleared individuals who have a good perspective of the sector, they can come in and work side by side with government partners to decide what information should get out. So I'll give the example in finance. There was, obviously during the DDoS attacks, we saw a lot of information. And at the time before the DDoS attacks happened, we had some information around some activity that the actors were hiding behind a certain tactic and trying to disguise their activity to make it look like something else. And so when we were able to look at that information, we said, we need to get this one sentence out to our sector. How do we do that? And then we sat down together and we figured it out. We ended up doing a one-day read-in. So we flew in some executives from finance, many CISOs from the particular subsector within finance that was being targeted, and brought them all in for a one-day read-in briefing. And they got the information, and then they were able to have context. So that's the important part, is the context, knowing here's some activity, here's some context, and go do something about it. And then they can go put measures in place within their organizations without really saying why they're doing that to protect themselves. So in that case, it really works. And I think sometimes it gets overblown. Like people want to have clearances because they think they don't know what they don't know. But when we can all work together, public and private, around information, because in the public side, they really don't have the perspective of the sector. They don't understand private industry. And so bringing those two sides together, with the public having the intelligence, the private having the actual activity and the knowledge, that can work. But it doesn't exist really right now. I don't know if you have anything to say on that, John.
Well, one thing I'll say kind of related to that is within just the K-12, one of the things that I've run up against, and I know this was an issue when the FSISAC was being created, but of So public schools, of course, get their funding from the number of students they have. And one of the comments that I first got when I started on this from somebody, an executive level person at a school, was, I'm not going to share my data with private schools. And I'm like, well, yeah, we're not trying to steal each other's students. We're trying to do something to benefit. But I think it's that mindset that understanding what type of information is being shared and how it can be shared. And we're not doing this to try to allow each other to, compete or not compete. It's to benefit the whole community.
Yeah, let me add to that, Eric. So the same thing happened with the PPISC. So when we first came together, I mean, you want to see awkwardness. It's get 50 of your competitors to sit in a room and say, let's talk about what's hitting us. And everybody kind of like, nothing to talk about here. And so when Heartland said, here's what happened to us. And then, and God bless him, John Latimer from TSIS said, well, here's what's happening to us over at TSIS. And then all of a sudden, First Data jumps in and Global jumped in. And next thing you know, we got this love fest of all the things that are happening to in the payment processor side of the industry. And and I'll tell you how that really worked out, because in 2010, the Russians were, some Russian operatives were doing a large credit card fraud scam across a number of different competitors. And so we saw it. I picked up the phone and called Rick over at First Data, and I said, are you seeing this? And yep, we're seeing it too. And I called John, yeah, we're seeing it over at TSIS. So we all got together, put together our notes. We were able to figure out the 51 banks that they were using, got that over to law enforcement. And long story short, we were able to actually get the Secret Service at one of the banks when the guys were actually trying to cash out. Now, the story goes on from there, but the idea is we were able to get the right information to an agency that had people on site who could do something. And that all came about because competitors were able to sit together and talk about what it was that they were seeing. So it just takes somebody who has the courage to stand up and say, here's what it is. But then you have to have people who are innovative enough to understand it's not just in their interest to understand, it's everybody's interest to understand that.
So I'm going to get on one of my soapboxes. Cybersecurity should not be a competitive issue at all. Okay, we should be a community working together because the bad guys are doing it.
Internally and externally.
So shame on us for not sharing. That's my soapbox.
No, I completely agree, and I don't know how many really understand it. It also has a full ecosystem, right? I mean, when John made the call to the other John, Columbus, Georgia, I will never forget that. I mean, TSIS, right, headquarters, and I mean, we were not supposed to know, but we were under NDA with them, so we knew, and then that's how I know John, and it's the whole ecosystem opens up, right? And this is not too long back. It's in recent past, and it took us so long to get here. And I think we have done some progress, but I think the two-way is extremely important from public-private side, but the two-way from the industry to the service provider side, that's also important. I think if I put my EY hat on here and I'll tell that we don't get accepted in most of the ISACs, and that's because it's the same issue that he has, but we're in two different sectors, right? And I think we have to find a way to solve that. I mean, from CFF hat, when I put that on, I'm accepted everywhere, and I think not too many people can do that. But I think we need to have that's probably the next evolution of how do we information sharing and help others.
And that's one of the things we've talked about with the K-12 ISAC is we want those partners to be involved because they are only going to help make the K-12 environment better. And at the same time, there's a lot of partner organizations in the K-12 industry that are a little bit behind themselves. And so to bring them into that fold and be able to share all together, I think it's just going to make the K-12 industry stronger.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I was going to jump into, and so one of the things that's kind of unique to health, and it was very eye-opening for me when I came across to the health sector, was We have a number of subsectors within health, and one of them are the medical device manufacturers. So those are the ones that make the pacemakers and the insulin pumps, and the hospitals or providers. And so they point fingers at each other, and they have a very antagonistic relationship because there's a lot of myths that go around about who owns what device. Hospitals, imagine, they're plugging these devices into their networks, so then the manufacturers don't have control necessarily over them, or they may, there's a lot of pointing fingers back at the manufacturers that they're building insecure devices. And actually, the October 1st, we worked with FDA and ARMIS, another a vendor out there that discovered 11 vulnerabilities within real-time operating systems, of which many IoT and medical device type devices use. So one of the things I did was, I was like, let's stop this nonsense. We're same team here, right? So we created a working group under the ISAC where we have two co-chairs. One's a hospital and one's a medical device manufacturer. And we're working to build bridges to say, look, we all have issues, we all have perspectives, we all need to work together, because shame on us for not doing that. And that's, it's an evolution, it's a people problem. It's not a technology problem, it's a people problem. And, it's like, let's work together to solve this issue.
Excellent. I think we would probably close on the note of building bridges. So, John, you have any closing thoughts? Maybe we could go quickly around.
Closing thoughts. Yeah, well, I'm going to be a second to Denise's comment that the information sharing or intelligence sharing or whatever we're looking at has to be across the board, has to be something that we don't look at as something that we own. And I see companies nowadays, I see several companies nowadays that I'm familiar with who are drawing back on that and saying, no, there's legal ramifications if we get breached, da da da. And but the only way we can be successful is to share that data. As Eric said, our opponents are sharing it, and they have much more money, a lot more time, and a lot more skill. And that's what we're facing. So no one company can take them on. There is no company that sits here or any company in this country that can just take them on one-on-one. It has to be an effort of a community of people who are sharing that data to be able to fight that kind of a menace.
All right, great. So thank you to the panel. I think this is a critical topic for this community and us. We'll take it forward, and there are actions to be done, which is basically you're on to. So great. Thank you, John. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.